think that nicely segues into talking about a strand of your research that has been really unique. Um, Two things about it. On the one hand, you talked about the gender imbalance, particularly in managed expatriation. And on the other hand, you've talked about finding out what are people's priorities. One of the things I think that people management research has been really lacking in every sense, not just international reward management, mobilization, is actually getting the perspective of the individual, because it's really difficult. You can get access perhaps to managers with difficulty very often, and you can do surveys, but actually talking to real live people. And that's exactly what you've done in your research about women expatriates. You've looked at the gender dimension, you've looked at actually getting from the horse's mouth their perspectives. Could you talk a little bit about what you've found and what we might infer from those findings?
I think in terms of the sort of reward package itself, if we just sort of narrow it down to that area to start with, is that on the whole, I think women are looking for similar things that to men, in the sense that, yes, they're looking for, the money. Let's be blunt about it. They want to maximize the sort of financial outcomes from an assignment. So they're interested in any additional payments that are given. So if there's any sort of location payments or foreign service premium or whatever, they're interested in those. They obviously don't want to be worse off, so they want to make sure that they can manage the cost of living and so on. But what's quite interesting about sort of what women say about their assignments is that the areas that they're most concerned about are things like housing and their children's education. And it's not to say that men necessarily are not interested in those either, but women they made a point, I think, that it wasn't so much about the money, it wasn't so much about the housing allowance that they were given. It was the idea that at the end of the day they come home to a home, they come home to something that they feel comfortable in and that they want to live in, rather than just somewhere that's a base. And the women actually said they felt they were different from men in that respect. But, there was some comment about, well, men are only interested in making sure they've got a bed and a hot shower. But, I want to come home to a nice home that I feel at home in, comfortable in. So it was the quality of housing. And of course, that's a very interesting one for employers, because you might be able to, get quite good quality housing in established expatriate locations or major world cities. But it gets quite difficult when you're starting off in very new countries, challenging remote locations, ones that just don't have that infrastructure in place. So that can be a bit of a challenge. And then the idea about children's education, again, I'm not saying that men are not interested in their children's education, but women definitely get very, or seem to get very upset about if they felt that their employers were going to be reducing the allowances that were being given, anything that would actually damage the quality of the schooling that their children could access. In other aspects, though, sort of a bit broader than reward, I think also women are quite interested in the sort of locations that in the world they go to. So they're interested in places that actually build their careers, so high profile locations that management are interested in. So expatriates who go there are like, oh gosh, you've been there, that's, you're recognized for where you've been. So they want that because they know that that's career building, and career is the main reason that they accept the assignments. But they also want to make sure that where they are is safe and secure, particularly if they're going with children, with family. So they might turn down locations that are high profile, but they regard as unsafe. And they're also interested in, particularly where they've got younger children, what's available in the way of facilities for childcare. So some locations that have got they're well known for, good work-life balance, good childcare. So the Scandinavian countries or some of the East Asian countries, for example, those ones, they might not necessarily be the most high-profile locations to go, but they trade that or balance that against this sort of family stability and, where they can actually get good education or good childcare for their family members. So that's just a brief summary of what they're looking for.
I mean, really, we talk a lot about thinking holistically, and the original idea of keeping expatriates whole. You're talking very much about a holistic approach when it comes to women expatriates.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't want to sort of make out that women are more demanding than men. I think men probably might be looking for different things. But this comes back to this idea of communication and flexibility, doesn't it? It's like, you need to find out what people are motivated by. And not all women are going to be motivated by the same things. No one's going to be motivated by the same things. Everybody's got their own sort of wish list. But I think organisations have got to try to improve the employee experience in terms of going abroad, such that they get what that motivates them, that will keep them happy, that will actually make them productive. Because at the end of the day, you want your assignment to be a success. You don't want these people to be griping and complaining and not working or sowing seeds of discontent amongst any future expatriates. So you want that to work out. And it's about communicating with people to find out what they want and need, but also setting that sort of employee experience against what the business wants and needs, because you can't, spend more than you need to. You've got to actually keep this competitive and keep it under control in terms of costs. And you've got to meet what the business needs in order to get the job done. But it is really about having that flexibility in place and having that communication in place so that you can try your best to match the needs of what employees want with what the business wants.
And that idea of what employees want as well as what the business wants takes us into the broader idea of thinking about reward, again, as I say, holistically. What happens next? We've got flatter organisations. We've got the idea that, as you say, you could box people in terms of their assignments. What about the ongoing career? There used to be this whole notion that for some people, going on an expatriate assignment could almost be career limiting with the particular company that expatriated them. They came back, there was no progression, they left, and what a loss of talent. Has thinking moved on in that respect about more holistic career management with international mobility to be part of it?
It's still a problem. It's still a problem. I mean, the larger organizations do tend to have international global career pathing systems. And, people's careers are all kind of plotted out. You've gone here and you've gone here and somebody else is going here. And they sort of plot that out. And if they're smart about it, they have sort of like databases running where individuals can contribute to those databases and say when you're available to move or when you're not available. Because often people can't move at particular stages of children's education, for example, or something might happen in the family and they say we can't move now, but we can move in 3 years' time. So they'll be combining those career pathing systems with where you're plotting out the careers with what employees are able to do and wanting to do. So if you're at the most sophisticated, that's what's happening. But for a lot of organizations, you send people abroad, and when they come back, there isn't really much for them in the sense that companies can't guarantee promotion on return. They can't necessarily guarantee what will be available when you come back, because all organizations are in a state of flux. So you can't really make the promises, particularly if you're a fairly small organization. So there is still the problem that on repatriation, people's skills and talents aren't used, and they move on, they leave. Now, that's obviously very wasteful for organizations. You've spent an awful lot of money investing in these people, sending them abroad. And what you want is you want them to exchange information when they come back. You want them to sort of prepare and train other people to go out potentially. You want to maintain these sort of host home or third country links between businesses. And you want that knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer. And you're letting that all go to somebody else when you've spent all the money on preparing these people and paying them. And then someone else just comes around and sort of snatches them up and thinks, oh, good, we've got somebody with expat experience. So I think that there's, you can't necessarily provide a career advancement but you can make sure that you provide the ability for that person to use their international competencies when they get back in some way. And I think that, you know, obviously promotion was great if you can offer it, but if you can't, you've got to find a way to encourage these people to actually use their skills in a role that actually demonstrates to everybody else, but also to themselves, that, you know, they have moved on, they have grown as human beings, and they want to be able to use those talents and abilities in what they do. And sometimes also, I think preparing people coming back, just training on repatriation as well as training on expatriation, training to so that people actually understand that, you know, they are coming back into a culture which they have now they've grown away from in some respects, because they've embraced new cultural attributes and new cultural values, and they won't see things in the same way, and that can often be quite, you know, disconcerting, I think, to individuals when they come back. But perhaps understanding that you're likely to experience that, almost like a reverse culture shock, actually understanding that that's what you're going to experience, can go some way to offsetting potential sort of discontent and unhappiness and the desire to just move on and leave and go somewhere else. But that said, you know, once you've had that global experience, people on the whole quite like it, you know, and often they want to go away again. And if your organization can offer that, all well and good. If not, you have to be, I think you do have to expect some degree of attrition, but it's the role really of the organization to try to ensure that you keep people for the length of time that you need them for, in order to have that knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer, and get the value back from the assignment in the first place.
Pretty profound stuff.
Not easy, not easy.
uh,
Nobody's really, I don't think people have totally solved it. And I don't know that you can totally solve it, but you can go some way towards improving your retention rate. But that is about ensuring that you prepare people for repatriation just as you prepare them for expatriation, that you make use of their skills and talents when they come back, and you do your very best, you know, also to support the family on re-entry when they come back. So there are things you can do. It's not going to be a perfect answer, but there are things that you can do to actually improve the situation for the family and the expat coming back, but for your business as well, because you want to benefit from it, benefit from all the money you've invested in that person while they've been away.
Absolutely, yes. Return on investment, obviously,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
before. Before we bring the conversation to a close, a couple of other things just quickly like to get your views on. We've ranged back over the decades what's happened. We've talked about the contemporary, near contemporary environment. If you've got to get your crystal ball out, any things that you think are, you know, trends that you sense will be to the forefront around international mobility and reward over the next, say, decade?
I think there's going to be more focus on developing local people, because you can't keep sending, you know, expensive expats out and moving them all around the world. And countries are getting a little bit more protective about their borders, and they don't want immigration, and even if it's skilled immigration and so on. So, or they only want limited immigration. So I think there's going to be a greater focus on developing and training and recruiting from the local workforce, which I think is only the right thing to do, actually. I mean, if you're going to have your business going into another country, you can't really just go in and then bring in all your top people and not actually provide career opportunities for locals. So I think there's going to be much more focus on that. I also think in terms of competitiveness, we're going to see a lot more growth in the use of ways and means of doing these so-called one-way transfers, local terms and conditions, so-called host plus or local plus type arrangements. And that will mean, I think, a lot more focus as well on issues to do with compliance. Certainly, you know, tax authorities, immigration authorities are tightening up, and employers can't afford to fall foul of those. So I think there's going to be a lot more focus on that, particularly with the trend or the interest in this working from home, working from anywhere, these kind of working in remote working in different countries as well. So I think the focus will be on cost control, it always has been. You can't cut it too much, otherwise you can't get people to move at all. But you can certainly reduce your costs by looking at different types of arrangements, the so-called host plus, local plus, one-way transfer type approaches. So that's one area. And then the compliance area. And I think companies are wisening up now to the importance of the family, focusing on them, because effectively they can make or break the assignment. And then I think the final point is on diversity, because I think that, you know, drawing upon a very narrow talent pool isn't helpful, and a much wider approach to diversity, looking across the range of different people on different qualities and skills and talents they can bring is important, but not putting people into buckets again, but really about thinking about it in an intersectional way, taking on board intersectionality, because everybody's going to have different combinations of characteristics that will make them unique and give them the talent that your business needs. But you have to also recognize that uniqueness and support it in any way that you can effectively to make that assignment work.
And linked to that, then, thinking about our audience, people who aspire to be reward and HR professionals working internationally, what would you sum up as the things that they've, apart from, of course, attending their lectures and reading our books and articles, what kind of things can they do to best place themselves to be successful in this world that we're envisaging?
I think that as individuals, they have to be very flexible, and they have to keep up with what's going on and what the trends are. And they're changing quite fast. I think in the 80s, things, you know, was very slow to move on. But now there's sort of new things happening all the time. So I would say not only go to the lectures and read the academic journals and read the books and so on, but keep on top of what's happening with practitioner surveys as well, because I know they have their faults. You know, they're based on a narrow client base, and they tend to be Western in their approaches, but it gives you a feel for what's happening and what's going on. And I'm not saying that you should necessarily just follow blindly, because that's not necessarily the best way to go, but to take on board some of the ideas, look at what's happening, try and understand why firms are doing what they're doing, and then select the best from those. Look at what's available to you, but don't be afraid to do something new, because somebody has to be the first mover. Someone has to do it. So I think if you're, you know, a new professional in the area, you're sort of aspiring, listen to what the old hands have to say, because it's amazing how these things go round in cycles. You see things happen and then it goes round in a cycle and round again, and almost like the information just doesn't get transferred over the generations. So listen to what sort of people have done in the past, and consider what works, what doesn't work, and be prepared to take a flexible approach, I think.
Great advice. Before we wrap up, is there anything I haven't asked you about which you think I should have?
Oh, I'm sure if you asked me another question, I'd found another 40 minutes worth of something to tell you about. But I would say I think we've covered enough for now, actually, for these new professionals to sort of try and get to grips with, because it's a very big field. I think the only thing I'd sum up at the end is like international HRM and global mobility. It's why it's always fascinated me, is because it's everything in the domestic sphere, but with an international focus. And it differs in every part of the world. And different industry groups do things differently. You can't just copy what somebody else does. And even within an industry group, you can't do the same thing. I'll always remember, because my research is in the oil industry, and I'll always remember people always say, oh yeah, but we're not a Shell. It's like sort of like Shell has been doing it a certain way for many, many years. And even with the industry, within that industry group, oh no, we're not a Shell. So it's like you can't copy other firms, because everything you do has to fit within your own culture, your own organizational culture, and your own strategic goals. And they're never going to be the same as somebody else's. So I think the overall summary is be brave, you know, be prepared to do something different, because if it works for your firm, that's what it's all about. It's not about just copying everybody else, but it is important to look at what they've done and learn the lessons from it. But you don't have to be a shell.
Beautifully put. Thanks so much for sharing your time and wisdom. Can I say it's a real privilege to continue to work with you. You and I, we've shared an office space, we've shared a lot of mindsets, we're involved in quite a lot of co-research and authoring, and I've gained a great deal from working with you. Thank you so much. And thanks for sharing your wisdom with the people listening and looking at what we're saying in these little videos.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Stephen.